micro APS-C style chips. I don't know how many of you are like really familiar with camera technology, but it's basically a smaller sensor. It's going to be a lot noisier. It's just a lower quality overall. I mean, that's a whole other discussion. So highly recommend a high quality full frame DSLR and a sharp prime lens. Don't use a telephoto lens because the extra glass in a telephoto lens will cause the image to be a lot blurrier and lower the quality of your final results. More megapixels obviously equals better. The Sony A7R II and the Canon 5DS are pretty much industry standards now for most like AAA studios and other people doing like high-end photogrammetry for games. They're both, close to like 50 megapixels, which is like a significant step up from most other DSLRs, which range usually from like 12 to 24 is sort of like the normal for like a prosumer style camera. 35 millimeter lens is generally like the most versatile kind of lens you can have. You can get it prime for pretty cheap. I find that's like a decent lens as a starter lens. Anything wider than that, you have to worry about distortion. I mean, obviously you can correct for distortion, but a 35 millimeter lens is going to require, the least amount of distortion while also providing you basically the most sort of flexible shooting range for a variety of different kinds of captures. And after that, pretty much the most essential thing that you need on a shoot is a color checker. It's set like I highly recommend it. Trying to set white balance manually by yourself post shoot is a nightmare. Especially for people like myself, I am like mildly colorblind, and so I find a color checker. I mean, not just don't do it. Even if you have great color vision, don't do it without a color checker. It's just like a simple card, and it has a bunch of different colors on it, and a bunch of like neutral grays, and like it goes from like white to black. And basically, you can use it as a calibration after you shoot your raw data. You bring it back into Photoshop, and you'll be able to color correct and get the like precise real world color values, even adjusting for all the white balance stuff. I'll talk more about that a little bit later. Software. So pretty much right now, the main industry tools are reality capture and Photoscan. Reality capture is my tool of choice. I used to be a Photoscan user, and then when I was working at AI in LA, I learned about reality capture, and it's hard to say objectively the superior product, but I mean it's very difficult to make an argument for Photoscan these days. Reality capture is significantly faster. It's GPU based. If you have an NVIDIA GPU, you can solve a scan on the highest quality in as little as 15 minutes, depending on the number of photos that you've taken. Even like upwards of like 50, 60 photos you can solve in under 20 minutes. Whereas with Photoscan, that used to take hours. You have to let it run overnight. The other big difference is reality capture completely caches on your drive. It doesn't rely on RAM. So with Photoscan, in order to solve large data sets, you'd have to have like 128 gigs of RAM, which is pretty obscene. But with reality capture, as long as you have an SSD, you can solve enormous data sets without even with like 60 gigs of RAM, you'll be fine. And then Photoshop, Camera Raw, any sort of image processing software that handles raw images should be fine. I mean, that's sort of the standard. I feel like most people have access to that. It's a pretty easy go-to. If you don't, there's obviously other free solutions out there, but those are the two main image softwares that you need. All right, capturing, conditions and lighting. Okay, so these are sort of the ideal scenarios: overcast, sunny and shadow, or sunny using an occluder. Essentially what you're just trying to do is minimize direct lighting. I mean, direct lighting is the enemy here. Basically, as soft and ambient as lighting as you can get is going to make the rest of your process easier. Obviously, you want it to be dry because then you don't have all the specular response on the materials then. Time of day and season can play a decent role. During the winter, there's sort of a limited window for your exposure values to be good, and pay attention. Pay attention to the weather conditions just in general. If it's a diffuse cloudy day but the sun starts breaking through, it's really gonna it's really going to ruin your scan. So honestly, my go-to is either sunny and shadow or use an occluder. I used to think that overcast was sort of the go-to route just because the lighting's so soft, but I found that overall, because the luminance is so low on overcast days, it makes it really difficult to meet the insane ISO and shutter speed requirements of doing photogrammetry. And so shooting in shadow on a sunny day or using an occluder, basically just like blocking the direct sunlight, is going to give you a higher luminance value and essentially just as soft of light. So that's that. Camera settings, ISO 100 or less, that's absolutely essential. I can't stress that enough. I can't tell you how many scans I used to do in the past where I was like, I can get away with 400, 800 ISO, and try to, just scrape by, and it just absolutely deteriorates the quality of the final result. Shooting at ISO 100 will just give you, because anytime you're adding any sort of noise or, like abnormalities to the image, you are sort of ruining the software's potential to get an accurate scan. So try as much as you can. If it means shooting on a tripod, do it. Take your time. Shoot at 100 ISO or less. Aperture, you're basically aiming for the sharpest point of the lens. Every single lens has a point along its aperture that will yield sort of the sharpest final image. Like if you do like comparison results, and if you shoot at like f1.6, like this is not even talking about depth of field. This is just the sharpness of the final photo, even with what's in focus. If you shoot at like f18 or f1.7, 1.7 or whatever, it's going to be far softer, even the stuff that's in focus, than if you shoot at like f10 or it depends on the lens. You have to kind of like find the place for your lens. But it's usually between f8 and f11, which also works out well because that also has a pretty wide depth of field, so you don't have to worry. I mean, obviously, photogrammetry, you're trying to capture everything in focus. You don't want to have things out of focus for that's sort of intuitive. And then shutter speed, 1/160 minimum if handheld. It's just really easy to, if you're shooting slower than that, to introduce motion, from your hands. Like humans are shaky. It's just very difficult unless you have like rock solid hands, and you're especially trying to move quickly. If you only have like an hour or so to capture something, f160 is sort of, or shutter speed of 1/160 is about the minimum. If you're using a tripod, it doesn't matter. I've shot as long as like 4-second exposures. When I did the subway project, I did a scan of the ground section, and I think the exposures were close to 4 seconds long. Like obviously, there's a little bit of noise introduced there, but my camera I have the A7R2, and there's like some long exposure noise reduction on that. But don't worry too much about that. It's not as bad as like the ISO noise. Obviously, get good exposure. That's essential. Any object that has, if you're underexposing and the image is really dark on certain areas, those areas are not going to, especially when you convert the raw images down to 8-bit and export into reality capture, you're going to lose a lot of data, and it's just not going to solve those areas. So really make sure you have good exposure. The object that you're capturing should really fall right in the middle of the histogram. And then use your color checker or gray card just to, when you're shooting, just to make sure you can set the white balance there. Processing images. Okay, so this is like, I'm not going to go too in depth into like the next few processes because this is sort of like software specific, but I'll go over sort of the basics of it. So you just essentially what you need to do to process the images these days. Both Photoscan and reality capture now automatically correct for image distortion, so you don't need to process that. Pretty much the only things that you really need to do to your raw images is set the white balance. If you want to tweak your exposure, whatever, that's fine. Obviously you want to shoot for correct exposure, but if you need to, change your exposure. And then this is the key thing right here is pulling the highlights down and pushing the shadows up. Essentially, as long as you've shot on a low ISO, like if you push the shadows up and you've shot and your photos are really underexposed, you're going to get a ton of noise in the blacks. But as long as you've exposed your photos correctly, you should be fine pushing the shadows up and the highlights. Don't worry about that. But you should be fine pushing unless you really overexpose it. But really push these shadows up and the highlights down because that's basically going to be the start of your albedo creation, and it's also going to allow reality capture to it's just easier for it to solve. Okay, so here's sort of a contentious thing. Export is the highest quality JPEG. A lot of people really firmly believe that you have to work in 16-bit. You have to export as TIFF, and I've done numerous experiments, and some of my coworkers have done numerous experiments on this, and the trade-off of having to deal with these like 2,000 enormous 40 megapixel TIFF files, the quality, as long as you do everything right in this process so far, and you don't need to do radical corrections later on, 16 bits irrelevant. I mean, at the end of the day, RC reality capture is going to projection map onto your model in 8-bit anyways. So you're getting 8-bit out at the end of the day. There's like sending 16-bit in, unless you're really having problems like in the darks or the lights or something, finding detail, which you shouldn't have is if you've done everything right so far. 8-bit is totally fine, high quality JPEG is totally fine, and it's way faster. It's way lighter on your hard drive. Like this photogrammetry is just the worst data hog. Like I have like SSDs, like terabyte SSDs just full of scan data. It's just the worst. So any time that you can cut down on the data, like it's a good thing. And the loss of quality is negligible in this case, as long as you've done everything else right. So I always go to JPEG. I know that's what they do at DICE too, so there's good confirmation there. Okay. Solving reconstruction. So this is like, I don't want to talk too much about this because I don't want to get into the actual like details of using reality capture. That's something that obviously if you're interested in, it's a pretty intuitive program. There's lots of like tutorials and stuff like that. But basically, it's painfully simple. It just involves importing images into reality capture, doing the alignment, solving, and then doing the projection. And basically, you get a high poly model and you get a texture. So after that, you're creating your low poly game model. So just like any traditional workflow, you're starting from your high poly mesh. In this case, like an exported model from reality capture, because often they can be relatively high, sometimes as high as like 500 million tries. So root topologize in your preferred program. I use ZBrush, Maya, whatever program you use, whether it's Mac or any of the automated TopoGun, whatever it is you want. Create your low poly model, and then UV keep shells distortion free and correctly rotated using detail maps. Pretty like basic game workflow here. Baking, export your high quality mesh parts and single texture up to 64K. That's one thing that's great about reality capture is that it exports up to 64K maps. Agisoft can only export up to 16K. Reality capture also, it's really nice to break apart your high quality mesh into much smaller individual chunks, so it makes the baking a lot easier. You're not loading in one like 100 million try like 4 gig OBJ file. You can break it down in much smaller parts, and then just bake your maps. I use XNormal for some of my stuff. You can use null, whatever it is. You can't use Substance Painter, which I'm going to get into next. I use Substance Painter for pretty much all the rest of my workflow, but you can't use Substance Painter, because unfortunately, as of now, it doesn't have an ability to make a texture from the high poly. You can make vertex colors and you can make material IDs, but you can't make a texture map from the high poly, which is weird. I don't know why they haven't implemented that yet. But anyways, you can do that XNormal. So I usually bake out most of my main maps, but this is sort of the way I actually do it. This is my Substance Painter workflow. Is because you can't make the high poly texture in Substance Painter, I use XNormal for the normal map and the color, and then I bring those two maps into Substance Painter. I generally do all my repairing of the normal map if there's any sort of like errors from. Oftentimes when you do a scan, there'll be like sections where the capture, just missed. You happen to miss a part, or there's just like an error, whatever it is. Like everything else is great. You can just repair your map in Substance Painter. Substance Painter is great for repairing normal maps across the board. Like if you're just baking in general and you get little minor errors and you don't want to like have to explode every tiny little part or whatever it is. You know, I always do my map repairs in Substance Painter, and you can even add to it. A lot of times, I'll add like micro normal details to my normal maps in Substance Painter, and make those little additions, and then basically I'll export that normal map, I'll re-import it again into Substance Painter, and then I'll bake all my maps in Substance Painter based on that new normal map. So I don't know if many of you are familiar with like Substance Painter, how you can, instead of baking from a high poly, you can feed it a normal map that's already been baked, and it'll rebake all of the maps, your ambient occlusion, your curvature, your world space normals, all these other maps based off of just a normal map. It'll bake it just as if it was baking from the high quality. So that allows you to bake with those new details, with the holes and stuff being fixed as well. It's a great sort of workflow. All right, so delighting and material creation. So for delighting, you have a few methods. This is kind of going from least practical, most complicated to sort of most practical, least complicated. So, well, that's not necessarily true, but it's sort of, the most complicated method is HDRI capture. So this requires you to, at the time that you scan the object, to actually do an HDRI capture as well. And then you have to bring that HDRI in. So once you've already projected your texture onto your low poly mesh, then you use the HDRI to basically bake out the shadows of the map. It's a whole complicated process. I almost never do it. I've only done it a couple times, and it was such a hassle, and the results were not that much different from what I'll go on to explain. That it's sort of a, if you want to tackle it, be my guest, but I don't recommend it. Unity has a delighting tool that's pretty intelligent. It just came out pretty recently. You can get it on GitHub, and I don't even know, it might be like fully incorporated into the builds now. But basically, it uses the world space normal to basically analyze the lighting data on the albedo that you brought in, and will basically create basically like an IBL, like an HDRI map based on where it thinks the lighting is coming from, based on how it analyzed the albedo data from according to the world space normal. And it's good, it works, but it's not great for objects that have complex materials. So like if you have a rock or you have a tree that has like pretty uniform color, pretty uniform material, it works really well. If you have an object with several different kinds of materials and lots of different color values, it really freaks out, it doesn't like it. So if you consider it like a valuable tool, but it's not sort of the grand solution to delighting. So then there's this method, which I call Pat Angill's method. So this is, my buddy and I sort of came up with this when we were trying to figure out a way to delight when we were working together. So Gil now works his big boy job at EA Dice, and he created a whole pamphlet on sort of this workflow. And you can, like, if you want to check this out, I can like send the link out or whatever. But basically, he breaks it down in excruciating detail about how to do that. I'm gonna go back to this, but essentially, it's okay. Oh, there it is. It's just a picture. Yeah, I forgot it was in Chrome. Okay. So, oops. So the key to this method is basically using the world space normal and the AO, those two maps. You can do pretty significant delighting. So the way the world space normal method works is you make a world space normal map for your object, right? And so basically you're getting directionality based on a color, correct? So what you do is, most light is, especially when it's ambient, there's still going to be sort of like a directionality to it, even when it's pretty soft. So essentially what you do is you take the world space normal map, and in Substance Painter, you create masks based on the different colors of the world space normal map. So you have the different axes, and you have the different colors based on that. So you create a mask based on each of the different colors of the world space normal map. And then you can essentially take those masks and adjust the intensity in the levels. You basically duplicate the albedo the number of times of the masks, and then for each directionality, you have full control using levels, basically, of the luminance value of each part of the map. So you can even out. So you have like a shadowed area coming on every face that faces down. You just, you take the mask from that color of the world space normal map, mask out those areas, use the levels, and boost that up until it matches the rest. And you can basically get every direction that you need. And then you can use the AO mask to basically mask out any natural occlusion, like self-occlusion. And then after that, a lot of times I'll do just blends of other materials and just like colors and procedural stuff in Substance Painter on top of the actual albedo to basically like bolster it and like further delight it, using various blending modes. So it's sort of like a complicated thing. So if you really want to dig into it, you can check out this thing. Gil broke it down really nicely, and yeah. All right, the rest of the material creation. So for me, this is sort of, if there's anything that I feel like really can set the quality of an asset apart, a scanned asset apart, it's this process, and this is where I really spend a lot of my time, where I invest a lot of my sort of artistic effort and thought into a scanned model, and it really comes down to the roughness map, or smoothness, whatever you're using, and as I think I mentioned this earlier, it's sort of, I like to think of it as like storytelling. Every object has a history to it. Whether it's been if it's brand new or it's old, it's been treated poorly, it's had things spilled on it, it's been scratched by certain types of objects. I really like to think about what has actually happened to an object within its lifetime. So, a lot of that is like studying the world, just sort of like looking at materials, looking at properties, like looking at this floor, for example, and like the way that the specularity works, like how there are like foot marks. You can see like people have like with rubber boots like this, like whatever, have made scuff marks. And the roughness value of a scuff mark is very different than a polyurethane floor like this. So there's so much like detail and nuance in the roughness map that I think a lot of times is really what's the realism missing from a lot of physically based stuff. Like a lot of times when you're playing games, just look at the materials and, honestly, if you pay attention, you'll notice that the thing that really feels the most unrealistic about it is the way that it interacts with light, not from a normal map perspective, but from a roughness perspective. There's too many objects that just have a very uniform roughness value. I mean, a lot of games and a lot of artists, they'll assign in the roughness value a single color value in the shader, and they'll have no sort of difference in the roughness values at all. And some people go sort of like the next step and they add like a little bit, like maybe there's some like slight occlusion, used to like add a little bit more roughness in like, holes and areas, but there's so much potential to really sell the realism in the roughness map, which brings sort of to the limits of PBR. The people who work, the engineers who sort of spearheaded and worked on PBR would probably be very mad for me saying this, but PBR is, it's physically based. It's not physically accurate. It's based on reality, but that doesn't mean it's actually 100% scientifically accurate. So it's something that's meant to be pushed. I think PBR is still an art. It's still just as much an art as the old workflows were. And so you really need to, I think a lot of people rely too much on the science of PBR and say, oh, it's it's this material A, and so I look up in this database what the value should be according to science. And so the danger with that is, one, it sort of limits the creativity of and the variation that you get in the real world in terms of roughness, and also it's not, the scientific value doesn't always look right because PBR is not 100% accurate. So real-time viewport is critical to the creation of a roughness map. Like, you can't just do it in Photoshop because guessing is not going to work. You really need to see in a, an OpenGL viewer how the light is going to actually respond to your materials, because the sort of plug-and-play, like, scientific approach, if you see it in a real-time viewer, you're like, that doesn't look right, and like, you should approach it from sort of the mentality that I want this to look realistic, just even when you switch, like, oftentimes, like, if you switch between using, say, you're using an offline render, like you throw it into iRay or whatever, and you render a material and it looks right in iRay, with a certain value, but then you put it back in OpenGL and it looks wrong, change it, like, there's no harm in, as long as, like, be wary of don't fall for one lighting scenario. Like, I think a lot of times people will work with a single lighting setup, like a single HDRI map, like an IBL, and they'll set all their roughness values and they'll be like, that looks realistic to me. But then if you were to switch the map out, it would look totally different. So constantly, like, I'm always swapping out my HDRI maps in Marmoset and in Painter, and like checking in all different kinds of lighting situations, because obviously that's sort of the goal of PBR in the first place, was to sort of unify that material pipeline, so you weren't constantly remaking all of your texture maps for different lighting scenarios. So be wary of that, but also don't be afraid to push it. Don't always make the choice that seems like scientifically right. Push the roughness map. Push the specularity a lot if you can, and if it looks right, then it's right. All right. Setup in Unity. There's not a lot to talk about here. Pack your maps, basic stuff, LODs, complex shaders. So with photogrammetry, obviously this extends beyond photogrammetry, but there's a lot of power. Unity has a lot of available shader packages where you can. I talked a little bit earlier about like using lots of different detailed normal maps. You can do world blending stuff. There's all kinds of ways that you can further increase your realism using photogrammetry through having slightly more complex shaders. That being said, that's not always the most efficient route and not always the useful route. I've worked on lots of projects where even the standard shader is too heavy, and you're working with something even lighter than that, and you make do with what you have. So if you have the option and it's there, I think the ultimate sort of photogrammetry route is using lower resolution base textures, and then having great photoscan sourced detail maps. That's like the lowest overhead and the highest quality in the end. And then obviously lighting and post-processing are huge. Even mediocre assets can look amazing with the right lighting and post-processing. That's not really part of the talk, but that's a huge part of my workflow, and I love the lighting and post-processing in Unity. And so if you have any questions about that kind of stuff, I'm happy to talk about that too. I didn't prepare anything, but I think that might be the end of it. Yeah, that's all I got. So I figured I might as well just sort of leave the rest. People have questions if we have time. I don't know how we're looking.
You have plenty of time.
Oh yeah.
Nick?
No, we're good.
So yeah, Q&A please if you.
Yeah. If anybody has questions, yeah. Please let me know. I'm happy to answer.
I'll start off. So like, what would you say is just for a workflow in terms of capturing like the scuff marks on a shiny floor like that, or even like dirt maps of windows?
Sure.
Transparent objects or reflective objects that like you want that really fine detailed imagery, but you obviously don't want to reflect everything else in the room or whatever's inside the window. Yeah.
So are you saying like, if you wanted to have, like, say you want to capture a floor like this, how would you go about it?
Yeah.
But to have that kind of detail?
Yeah, I want those scuff marks and those kind of,
Gotcha.
Separate that from extra reference.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Essentially what I would do is something like this would be very difficult to do just because there's such strong specularity. The only solution would be if you cut out the number of lights. I would probably turn the lights off and I would shoot with a flash with a polarization filter on. So that's something I forgot to talk about. I should have talked about that. So one of the big ways to remove specularity on objects that you're shooting is to use polarization. I don't know if any of you are big into photography at all. But yeah, so polarization essentially like changes the angle at which the light comes into the lens, and so it like can remove specularity. It's kind of like a
When you
crazy
use a
magic
polarized
thing.
filter, then so do you shoot it from multiple orientations?
No, so you just, all you need to do is remove the specular highlight, essentially. So if you only have if there's only one light source, you only need a polarizing filter on the lens. If you have multiple light sources, what you need is you need to put polarizing film on all of the light sources, and then a polarizing filter on the lens as well.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a little more complicated. So shooting something like this would be slightly more difficult indoors, especially because of all the specularity, because it's such a shiny object. But in terms of, like, something like this is something that's really easy to create procedurally. Like, I would make this procedure. I'd use Substance Designer and just make this. It's not worth scanning. Like, there's hardly any normal map detail, nothing that isn't, like, easily creatable in about 2 seconds in Designer. And then all of the roughness stuff, you know, again, it's like scratches, scuff marks, things that are, like, relatively easy to do procedurally.
Paint and then add on top.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you really wanted like the specific scuff marks, like I'll often, I have a huge library of just like alphas that I create all the time, specifically from like photo sourced alphas that are just using like a specular highlight. Like, I mean, you probably don't see it because I'm at a different angle than everyone out there, but like there's a really hot highlight right here, and it's really accentuating the roughness, right? So if I took a photo right now and then just turn that into like a grayscale image and like mess with the levels, I'd get a pretty accurate little alpha of just those damage details, like those roughness, that then you could then use in Designer or in Photoshop or however you're making your maps to really like bring that level of realism to the roughness map. Yeah.
Two questions, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
First of all, great presentation.
Thank you.
There's like some gems in there that were really good. The first one was you mentioned Marmoset.
Yeah.
For your like portfolio work, you render Marmoset.
No, I mean all my stuff like at the beginning that's all in Unity. But I often like, yeah, like this is all in Unity. This is in Substance Painter. Okay. Yeah. So I use Marmoset a lot for like ideation, especially with lighting and like rendering stuff. Like when I first work on an environment, I'll often do a block out and then just bring it into Marmoset right away and quickly set up sort of how the like mood is, like whether there's like an intense atmosphere or whether it's like has like a more like a noirish light setup or really blown out, or like I focus a lot on that because that really helps then give a good indicator of whether or not assets are worth spending a lot of time on. You know, if you have like if you're working on something like this where it's like really dark and moody, you know, like and a lot of objects are like heavily occluded, you know, like in the shadows, you don't want to like spend weeks on a small asset that's not going to end up ever being really seen, things like that. So, but I think Marmoset is like really great for like quick previews, you know, like if you're just like, I mean, it's also great for like portfolio stuff too, but I prefer to do like my final stuff always in Unity because that's like my main thing and what I usually work on projects in. So it's like, it doesn't really help people if you're like, yeah, like here's my portfolio, it's all in Marmoset, and they're like, well, we want to hire you to do Unity work, you know, so I try to do it in Unity when I can, yeah, and avoid only doing Marmoset renders, yeah.
So then the other question I had was one workflow that I found out about recently that kind of like blew my mind.
Yeah.
Was, with the reality capture.
Yeah.
Doing the reconstruction of for room scale captures.
Yeah.
And then taking things that don't reconstruct like the walls, you know,
Sure.
be gone, taking that into like say 3ds Max, using it as a high quality, recreating the walls by hand, UVing and bringing them back in reality capture.
Yeah, did you read that? Was that on the Valve? Yeah,
That's right.
yeah.
Is that a workflow that you know?
I'm not a big fan of, like, that guy is great, like, all of his documentation is really amazing, and, like, I think it's great work, but I don't think that's, like, a very viable workflow for any sort of, like, photoreal game environment, just because all the, like, the stuff that he does, all the lighting is baked in, there's no roughness maps. Like it's literally just a single giant pre-light baked from the environment albedo, and then one huge mesh, and like it's just messy. It's like it's not very optimized. It's not very like artist friendly. You know, like, and it doesn't really have the potential to be lit in unique and new ways.
So if you were to do a room scale thing, what you would do would be to recreate the walls and then just make your own textures. You know?
Yeah, I mean, if someone asked me to make a room, I wouldn't do any photogrammetry. I would model it, and I would maybe use materials that were photo sourced. It depends on like if the room is a new room or if this is like some historic, crazy, damaged, destroyed room. Then maybe, yeah. Then I might do some scanning, yeah. Or if it was, you know, like had some incredibly like ornate Victorian, you know, like trim elements or whatever, I might maybe be interested in doing some scanning. But if someone was just saying like, hey, make me a photorealistic representation of this room, I would just model it. It's just like the amount of time to like get a good result. I mean, it would take so much longer, and I think the results probably wouldn't be as good. Like when at 8i, they had done a Resident Evil VR experience, and they scanned. This was before I got there. They scanned the entire room, and it was just like a nightmare. It's just like the amount of work that they put into it, and just like the results like weren't that good, you know. And so yeah, I would just use like as I said earlier, like break it apart. Use photoscan materials and like modular assets if you really feel like that's gonna like take to the next level. Use meg scans, use substance library, whatever it is. Like if you really are like looking to come back on time. But yeah, I wouldn't scan the whole room. Like if it's just like a rectangular metric or whatever.
Earlier you talked about using scans as references for like hyper-accurate scale,
Yeah, sure.
and for material references
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So you often find yourself like taking a scan as just a reference and then recreating everything from it, or
If it's something that's very difficult to recreate, like that car, for example, like there's little small parts and, you know, delicate little like leather folds, and, you know, there's a lot of very, very fine detail that would be very difficult to like approximate if you're trying to get that like hyper accurate. But for something like a room, like this room, I probably wouldn't. I just kind of get the measuring tape out in 5 minutes. I wouldn't go through the hard, you know, process of using scan. Yeah, but for some stuff, yeah, like it's great for measurements. Yeah, definitely.
I'm a bit new to photogrammetry, so I apologize if this is a horribly ridiculous question.
No.
How well does photogrammetry work with like Matterport type scans? Can you mix the two together, or do they?
With what? Sorry.
Matterport.
Oh, Matterport. It's funny. I actually worked on a project where one of the guys who like helped me on the scan insisted on bringing his Matterport and doing a scan with it, and we didn't use it. Matterport's cool. Like it's great. Honestly, like the one thing that we ended up using the Matterport for that was actually kind of neat was, I mean, it does the scan, but it also will give you just like a 360 image, right? So we use that actually to like extend the set essentially. So that ended up being like, yeah, just like a, you know, like our skybox essentially. So yeah. But that's another thing that might be helpful for reference. You know, if you're doing like something like I did this scan in the New York subway, and that actually, I didn't end up using it, but that could have definitely like been helpful if you were trying to like, because we ended up just doing it modular in like these like modular chunks, and so then the scale was already there built in because we just tiled it out. But if you really wanted to like capture the exact scale of like across the tracks, like and get it really precise, a Matterport would be great for something like that. Yeah.
Can I butt in, because I've been
Yeah.
the Matterport as far as the photogrammetry, like
Oh, yeah.
today and yesterday. So one of my opinions about it is the problem with Matterport is that with photogrammetry you need parallaxing, so the camera needs to move.
Yes.
And Matterport is all about camera rotation.
Yes. Yeah.
So that just
Yeah.
makes it more reconstruction. And
trying to
also-
overlap Matterport scans because they're machine.
Yeah.
It's just those things sounds like a better idea than it is, in my opinion.
Yeah.
As far as
That said, Paolo Tossolini is a developer who's local to us here in Redmond, and is actually doing some of the best Matterport stuff in the world. A lot of it for Microsoft's mixed reality spaces and stuff like that. So if you're interested in Matterport, then the technology is powerful. You just have to give it a lot of love.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not trying to talk poorly about Matterport stuff. I'm sure, I've only, as I said, it wasn't even me. I wasn't even the one using. I just saw the final results, and I wasn't blown away. But yeah, who knows? I guess it might be good if it's in the right hands.
Well, that's what I wondered. Holding
Yeah.
a couple of those scans that Paolo had done, and of course, there's a bunch of gaps.
Yeah.
And I thought it would be nice if you could, for the huge room, get that, but then just go in and sort of do detailed cleanup.
Yeah.
Using photogrammetry, and I wasn't sure if they blended well
That would be
together.
an awesome
or
workflow is
just-
to get a
Yeah.
rough out of some kind of 3D scanning
Yeah.
hardware that had
Yeah.
point cloud capture.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then buttress that with traditional
Yeah.
computed vision equipment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, very valuable. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
How do you go about managing the texture density of the stuff that you scan and keeping that in, texture memory? And do you use many textures? Do you?
No,
use
so
exotic on that?
yeah, so that goes back. So I generally, in terms of just purely from a capture sense, I scan at way higher resolution than needs in terms of what's going to become the albedo. Much higher resolution that's needed because of the reconstruction. Because I need the resolution for the reconstruction. So the resolution that I'm shooting for the quality of the geometry reconstruction ends up leaving you with a 64K texture for a decent sized object, which is obviously absurd, right? So, I mean, going back to what I was saying earlier, that obviously, it's always fine to downres. It's actually good, it's better to move down than it is to just stay the same, with dithering and stuff. So, super sampling. So, it's basically, I don't ever. We did try on one project to do a streaming thing, like Meg Textures or Amplify or one of those ones, yeah. And it was for a VR experience and it just wasn't optimized enough. It just didn't work very well. Not to say that those methods don't work, it used that for years and it was fine. But I guess it goes back to the fact that one, you don't need. Surprisingly, you don't need that much resolution. There's a really great GDC talk that I can't remember his name, Spencer or something, who's the lead environment artist on the original Battlefront, gave talking about this exact issue, and basically because the quality is so good with photo source material, you can really push the lower limits of resolution, especially obviously for most games, you should have your texel density set, I'm a huge fan of uniform texel density, even at the cost of wasting UV space. I think that having non-uniform texel density really ruins immersion. I hate playing Fallout just for that reason. You look at something and it's this looks great, and then you look at something next to it, this looks like shit. It just ruins the immersive experience of it. So I think having uniform texel density across your whole game is so important. I think more and more people are starting to realize that and push for that. But basically is if you follow that workflow of setting your texel density so that it's high enough that you can get away with it, but then relying on detail maps to really sell that fine, precise resolution, and then just fading that away in the shader at a certain distance, 10 meters or something. You're fade the detail maps, and so the combination of very, very, very high quality detail maps and low resolution but high quality albedos is killer. It really looks great. Even a 1024 map on a decent sized object with a good detail map looks just as good as an 8K map. You can't tell the difference. You can flip back and forth. In the talk, he flips back and forth between this rock that originally had 2 4K textures, which has a memory overhead of 150 megabytes, even with compression, right? And then down to one 4K texture down to 2 1024s with detail maps, and you can't tell the difference. It's imperceivable, So that's the biggest way to get around it is, make modular assets, or use tiling maps, but then really focus on your detail maps and just push that, like really focus on that. I think that's like the future of, at least until we get limitless memory.
Performance on VR and stuff like that is always going to be used, right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah, no. It's never good to plan for things for computers to be faster. It's always good to just continue to optimize. Yeah.
Well, and I recently started about a month ago playing around with Vegas games.
Yeah.
And do they have like plugins? I thought I saw something that they provide, like tool sets or anything like that in Vegas.
For Megascans, well, are you talking about like the bridge or the Megascans? What's it called? There's like an editor where you can like basically blend like it's like a splat map editor essentially, and blends different scan materials. Is that the one?
I think so.
Yeah.
I just went through their assets so far.
Yeah.
I saw to the right that it looked like they had some add-ons, and I wasn't sure if that was like stuff that you actually used for like your scans and stuff like that, or it's definitely.
I think I know what you're saying. Like when you download an asset, it gives you all those options of like you can download some of the source content, like the high poly, ZBrush, OBJ. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Those assets are great. I mean, I don't use Megascans that often. I have before, and I do sometimes. I always feel like they're cheating. It's like such a. I think everybody sort of feels like that. Like when Megascans first came out, everybody's like, "This is so unfair. Like these are so good, and like it's so easy. You just download them and you plug them in." But Megascans are great. No, I mean that's the future. Like these large. Sort of modular libraries that have the capacity to be procedurally blended. That's kind of the future, I think, of our workflow. Like, I mean, I always feel like at risk as an artist, that my job's going to be replaced by like completely. I mean, like people are making incredible models now in Houdini procedurally. It's insane. But that's just the steady march of technology. There's always new tools. But Megascans is a very useful tool. Yeah, not only for like the assets and the maps themselves, but for using them for your own projects. If you wanted to, like, say for example you wanted a really high quality photo scan sourced detail map, like say you scanned your own object, right? Like say you have this great rock wall and you didn't capture a very good detail normal at the time, but you have this great rock wall, but you want to be able to use the low resolution albedo texture from the original base mesh, but you want to like put on a great detail. Go to Megascans, find a rock material that has like a similar sort of like secondary, tertiary forms, and just download the normal map from that and use that as your high resolution detail map. I mean, yeah, there's lots of uses. Or even download the original. Most of the packages they'll give you the high poly mesh. You can go pull down to ZBrush, take an alpha from it. Use that in your own projects. Like I don't know, there's a lot of uses. Yeah, definitely, very very useful library.
Yeah, I've been, of course, doing stuff like more traditional. But then I saw previews for Megascans, and I was like, shit, I gotta check that out.
yeah, it's very good. Yeah.
Can you talk about or is it possible, or is it useful to use photogrammetry for something that might have multiple materials? Like, for example, your car door. I know you said you just use it as a reference, but if you have something like that where you have, leather with a bunch of stitching, then you might have a wood paneling, then you might have plastic like knobs or things like that. Would it work for something like that?
Absolutely. I mean, it's it goes back to like that treatment of materials thing. So like depending on the types of materials and the variation, like some of the materials might require some treatment, like some may not. Like a dirty leather probably wouldn't, but if there's say there's dirty leather and then there's like a metallic knob, you're probably going to need to do some sort of treatment to the metallic knob if you want the scan to turn out, like wrap it in tape or use like the matte spray or something like that. But yeah, absolutely, you could totally capture a multi material object with the right preparation. And then obviously the thing is like if it has like metallic objects and stuff, and you're doing a sort of preparation, that means you're going to be recreating the only like albedo data that you'll actually end up using is probably like say they're like the leather or whatever. I mean, a lot of times leather ends up not working out super great if it's like a smoother grain leather, just because it's pretty hot specular response. Like,
Mhm.
yeah, it's pretty. So, but yeah, absolutely, you totally can. Yeah.
And then you
Yeah.
just go into like substance or whatever, and then
Yeah.
you can set your individual like values for the shader,
Yeah,
different like
yeah, exactly.
smoothness and roughness.
Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, say it's like let's take like a basic example of like, say it's a leather box, and not a real object, and it has a wood panel stripe and a metal panel stripe, right?
Mhm.
You know, you take that into substance, and the albedo that you got out of substance or out of reality capture, whatever, depending on how you treated it, it may have those materials there. But like, even if it was metal, you probably want to just replace the metal entirely, because scanning metal is not, it's so much easier to just create a metal.
Yeah.
Like for dielectric materials, like sure, but no, for metals, like no, like just make it. You don't need to use that. I mean, that scan data is like the albedo is worthless. It's just like a random spackling of white and gray. But then for like the wood, maybe you can keep it, maybe you can't, but then you still obviously have to like give that the material properties of the rest that makes up a wood material. And then for the leather, so you'd be masking and like separating the parts. Just like normal stuff. But yeah, totally.
Cool.
Yeah. Questions? Oh yeah. So it'd be nice, yeah.
With using this shop for an example,
Sure.
one of the hardest problems I've had with using photogrammetry is holes.
Holes, sure, yeah.
And you were talking about remapping them and cleaning them up. What do you do in the field to help with I can only guess this, the ring of rocks there, which is actually scanned?
The rock is a scanned rock. Yep, I
Okay.
scanned that rock. Yeah,
And
that's
now-
from a different project actually. So these pipes, the rocks, and the pentagram, those weren't from the game. I made an actual room for the thing, and then for my portfolio, I put that in because I thought it was funny. Yeah, I just wanted to do like a Doom vibe thing. But yeah, the rock is a scanned rock. Yeah, exactly. Nothing else is, but the rock is. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
now, was that a ring or was that a series of different rocks that you scanned and then put pieced together?
That's one rock.
Okay, so
Yeah,
that's a
that's-
solid piece that you did, so no need to
Yeah, that's just one rock scaled and rotated a bunch of times. Yeah.
So then
Yeah.
do you find that doing that, setting them up as props in that case that you're going to use them is more efficient than say scanning, not necessarily more efficient, but more useful in the long run than scanning, a series of rocks maybe hung from a string or.
Yeah, absolutely. Modularity is like God in this world. For example, this scene, I think there's 8 assets.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a couple ground materials that Alex flat map, right? And then there's this rock, and there's this rock, and then there's this tree, and then there's the metal thing, and the little tiny thing. But that's it. That's
Uneven
it.
scaling,
There's two
rotation.
two huge modular rock walls that have a low resolution albedo and then a really high quality detail map. And then there's one rock and then the materials in the tree, and that's it. Yeah. So yeah, it's definitely a quality over quantity thing. I've seen and made the mistake myself, people trying to just capture a lot of stuff at a really low quality, and it's always, nature is so repetitive, organic stuff especially. It's really easy to trick the human eye. There's also decals. There's lots of other ways to sort of break up the repetitive nature of a modular workflow. Blending, all these different things. But yeah, for every project, I've always tried to figure out how can we reduce this to the smallest number of assets that each asset can be of the highest quality. I think everyone touched on it.
You kind of already answered my
Oh,
question
okay,
based
cool.
on that. I was going to ask, I was trying to figure out where were the modular parts for the seats for your artwork because I couldn't tell.
Gotcha.
So the specific one for the subway car.
Yeah, so I'll tell you.
So you have a lot of metal and glass inside of it.
Yeah. Okay, so for the subway, for the car, so there's
Got it.
this is a modular section, and then this is a modular section. So that's a tile, that's a tile, that's a tile. The ceiling was a modular chunk. This pole is the same pole all the way, just different decals. This wall, it's modular from here to here, and that's just the same wall. Well, that's not true. Yeah, it is. And then there's this decal.
But the bench itself.
The bench is just a single asset. The little trash can's a single asset. You know. Yeah. And then
The
this.
floor?
Sorry. Go ahead.
The floor looks nice. What is that? Just 2 or 1 for the floor?
Is two what?
How many are on the floor?
Oh, so this is the chunk right here.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then
You
it's-
look kind of maybe, but yeah.
Yeah. So the floor and the bench are the only two things that use photogrammetry in this project. The rest of it didn't work out well because like the tiles were just like way too hard to scan. So we just ended up doing it from scratch. I mean, like I took like reference photos and stuff, but and then the trick is just all traditional modeling and stuff like that. Yeah.
So with the scenes that look super hyper realism
Uh-huh.
rather than stylized,
Yeah.
do you run into an issue where it's just like, well, first of all, would you actually introduce like a human character or a human model into a scene like this?
Oh yeah, I get what you're saying. Sure.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. So again, like this is just one of those things. It's like when you work on one kind of project, you often keep getting roped into the same kind of projects. So for the last like year and a half or so, pretty much all the projects I've ended up working on use volumetric video. So like they're called like HVRs, which is basically like there's a couple companies. Microsoft's doing it, although most of the people there quit and now work at 8i, which is based out of Los Angeles. Although they just laid off a bunch of people too because they're moving away from production and just to scanning. So they all and like I think there's some other companies that are getting into this game too. But basically, they're doing photogrammetry. In its essence, it's photogrammetry, but it's video. It's volumetric video. And
What platform did you say it was?
well, it depends. Everybody has their own proprietary like file format, but like the like they're called HVRs. HVRs, yeah, is like a volumetric video. And so that term may not be super widely used. That's what we call them at 8i. And now that's what Scatter in New York calls them because I told them that word and now they use it. They just called them volumetric video, and I said HVR one time and they're like, what's that? I'm like, that's what this is. And they're like, oh really? I was like, that's what 8i called them. So that may become a word, I don't know. But yeah, so that's the thing with those is that was the reason why 8i got so interested in photogrammetry in the first place, and why they hired Gil and why they hired me is because they wanted their volumetric videos to blend well with the game world, and so they had people doing traditional stuff, and it just these photorealistic looking people did not blend well. Whereas it's almost funny, the opposite is true. Like if you put like average quality game character in there, you might kind of look out of place. Like a very high quality AAA character would probably blend okay, but if you put I don't know, yeah. So
Like I find that like when trying to go for that kind of realism in VR, like the uncanny valley issue,
Totally.
like VR seems to multiply it.
Yeah, definitely.
In my opinion.
Definitely.
So
Yeah, it's interesting. So yeah, I mean, I hate HVRs. I hate volumetric video right now because it's garbage. Like it looks terrible. Like to be honest, like it's a cool technology. It's really impressive. Like I have deep respect for the people who are pioneering it. But it's like watching a VHS tape, like in like 1990. It's like yeah, this is awesome. Like it's cool. It's new. But yeah, it's not very good. Like that format has a very, very, very strong outlook and future. And like I don't know if any of y'all have seen Neil Blomkamp's new like short in Unity and stuff like that. Like I think the future of real-time filmmaking is looking very bright, and I'm like that's something I'm really excited about. I'm glad that I've gotten put on these projects.
Side note, if you haven't seen what he's talking about,
Watch
look
it.
at the Adam videos, Adams 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
The first one was Unity Technologies. Then Blomkamp, who made District 9 and Chappie and a bunch of other great films, said, I want to do this for real-time production stuff, and
Yeah.
they're kicking ass with it.
Yeah. I would love to do a project with them. I'm gonna try to reach out at some point when I have more time because I love their work. It's really great. But yeah, like I think there's just so much potential with volumetric filmmaking.
And is that light field capture?
That they were using?
Yeah.
No, they use photogrammetry.
Okay.
Yeah. For like the environments, you mean?
No, for the HDR stuff.
Oh,
Performance capture.
so the in Atom they just in Atom
like
they
the 8i and all the other latest stuff you use.
that stuff is it's not light field, it's closer to photogrammetry, so they're using basically like, I'm probably breaking some NDA talking about this too much, but no, I mean this is not that like secret knowledge, but they're basically using an array, there's probably like 50 2K, I think they're upgrading soon to 4K, little Sony, like classic, like whatever cameras, and they're lined up in an array as if you were like the same array you would shoot in if you were doing photogrammetry on a huge green screen stage, and basically every single camera is recording at, I think they do 30 FPS right now, and all that data is streaming into a huge server, and they auto key every single frame from every single camera and use Amazon Web Services to basically go through the ridiculous computations to create this, basically moving.
Images per frame.
This, and then they compress it down to this, acceptable volumetric format, because it's basically it's point cloud based. It's not mesh based. So Microsoft used to be doing mesh based.
Like set,
Yeah, and that's exactly what Scatter. So Scatter is the company I worked for on this project, and they do a mesh based volumetric capture as well. And it's nowhere near as good as the point cloud based. It's just noisy. It's just prone to like artifacts and like I don't know. There's just a lot of reasons why mesh is not the way to answer, and that's why a lot of those people left.
Did you ever use Breckle on V2 to do point cloud and then overlay the color information and do that?
Sorry, say it again.
Did you ever use the second version of Connect to do point cloud capture and then overlay color information on those points?
That's sort of what Scatter's doing. So Scatter has a thing called DepthKit that basically uses the Connect and a DSLR to essentially do that, but like slightly more sophisticated. Yeah. So yeah, they're basically doing that exact same thing. So yeah, their HBRs are like pretty gnarly. Because their whole thing is like they're like a creative agency. Their stuff's like it's not like art. Like it's not like supposed to like like the HBRs aren't like supposed to be like super hyper realistic. But 8i is pushing the like photorealism. Like they have like a 6 million point volumetric video now. That's like their standard. It used to be like 1.8, now they're up to 6, and it holds up until you get about like this close. Like they did an NBA basketball player, and you can like get down and like look at his tattoos on his legs and like see the detail in the tattoos. It's pretty insane. I mean, the biggest selling point of volumetric video is the animation by far, because even mocap characters look so goofy still. To this day, like there's hardly a realistic character to be found in a game. But the HBRs are fully human. I mean, like other than the fact that like there's limitations to the rendering, they still haven't figured out how to really do. There's like sort of normal mapping now. There's not roughness mapping yet.
Stuff like that.
Well, I mean, you don't have to worry about that because it's all baked in. It's like every wrinkle, everything is baked in. So it's, you can't change the performance, but the performance is incredibly realistic. Yeah. But yeah, there's like a lot of cool stuff going on. I'm actually trying to work on a film this winter, trying to get funding from like Sundance and some of these other studios to make a short film using volumetric stuff. But it's very much in its infancy right now. Like it's all very bad in many ways. But I think give it like 10 years or so, and I imagine we'll hopefully be able to that'll be sort of a new medium. Like at home you can watch a volumetric film. Like instead of going to the theater, that'll be sort of the thing. I think there's like an incredible intimacy and like sort of immediate feedback that you get watching a performance in the same space. Like I'm working on a film right now that is about two parents whose son died of AIDS during the AIDS crisis, like talking about their son on this like road trip to his gravesite, and it's like profoundly emotional. Like even though as a short film, it'd be an okay short film. It'd be a good short film. But being in the car and like watching these performances, like you can like touch these people, it's very moving. Like it's really powerful. So I think there's like very legitimate potential for it. Whether or not like who knows, it may go the way of like HD DVD Laserdisc, but I
think
doubt
that's gonna be
it.
360 video.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. So who
Like,
knows?
There are so many great uses for it, but
Yes.
as a replacement for VR.
Yeah. I mean, it may come to the point that there's a lot more technical hurdles to like overcome and a lot of things that need to like evolve before it can get to this point. But I mean, there is potential for the use of HVRs as game characters. You know, when I was at 8i, both Epic came and like Sledgehammer came and like some of the big studios came and were interested in figuring out, seeing if it was something they could start implementing, and it's not yet. I mean, like I knew they were going to be like, no way, but it was cool that it's definitely a potential. I mean, especially for, I always felt like the big use was just for the face. Like if you just kept traditional animation mocap and mesh face for the body, but then use volumetric capture for just the face, because the face is like such a difficult thing to do right. It's so hard to, even with complex muscle riggings and all that stuff, it just never looks
Well,
like.
humans are trained to recognize when faces look weird because it tells us not to trust them or that this person is different.
Yeah, that would definitely get rid of that
One of the
kind
things that we
of.
find is that people animation doesn't unfortunately match up to what mocap is doing in terms of 120 hertz or 240 hertz.
Yeah.
Because your face is moving constantly. Your pupils are moving constantly. We actually have to take back the TV here in a moment, but I think we still have a few minutes after that to convene. Patrick, this has just been an awesome presentation.
No, thank you all. Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, I appreciate it. I think my wife is just happy that I'm not talking to her about it.
And gigantic thanks to Wizards of the Coast. You guys are amazing hosts. We really appreciate you making it happen. Thank you very much. I know we had a lot of people show up kind of late, so a couple things. If you